Alright class, so today I'm going to be giving a quick little lecture on a phenomenon which I will tentatively term the expansion connection inversion phenomenon, or the lonely at the top phenomenon, and how it applies to any given field of knowledge, but particularly how it applies to spiritual awakening and enlightenment. Now, the premise itself is reasonably straightforward, but the implications are quite expansive, and if one thinks this through sufficiently, it can potentially reframe how one views the fundamental act of both assessing and sharing information in almost any possible context. So, simply put, the phenomenon is this. The more expansively knowledgeable any given individual becomes in any given field, the less anyone else will actually be able to fully comprehend or verify their expertise due simply to the fact that they would have to also possess the same level of expertise and able to accurately assess the expert's expertise. And hence, the more one expands one's knowledge in a given field, the more one-directional their connection to others will be in that field, insofar as they will be able to grasp the limitations of others, but others will not be able to fully conceive of the expansiveness of their awareness. Now, like I just said, that's a reasonably straightforward and fairly obvious idea at its core, but its implications are far-reaching, particularly in the context of psychological and spiritual growth and expertise. So it's worth examining some of the implications in detail if one wishes to have a realistic frame of reference with which to assess the potential nature of truth or expertise in any number of contexts. So, to provide a vague example, technically speaking, if there is an individual who is superior to all others in a given field of study, in most cases, the individual who would be most capable of verifying that that individual is the most knowledgeable individual in the given field would have to be the second most knowledgeable individual in that field. And essentially the only way he would be able to verify the other individual's expertise would be due to his own awareness that he has observed himself to be superior in understanding to everyone else in regards to the topic at hand, and that this other individual alone has shown him something beyond his depth of understanding about the topic. However, it is also possible that the more knowledgeable individual's scope of awareness could be so far beyond the second most knowledgeable individual's that the second most knowledgeable individual actually wouldn't be equipped to verify that the other individual is more of an expert than them, without first being taught by the other individual in some way that helps them become capable of recognizing their own limitations. Now, this phenomenon would naturally continue down the line of expertise, such that the third most knowledgeable individual in the field would have a similar process for discerning that the other two are superior to him by merit of having compared his expertise to all others, and so on and so forth, downward and downward in understanding until one reaches the conglomerate of individuals who are absolutely clueless about a given topic, who, unlike the experts at the top, who are mentally separated from one another by merit of their expertise, would all be mentally united about their grasp of the topic simply by merit of their unified ignorance about the topic. Now, like I said, that was a little bit vague, so I want to now provide a slightly more robust theoretical to contemplate. So imagine for a moment that there is an individual who is the foremost expert on astrophysics on the Earth, an individual who has discovered solutions to problems that nobody else on the Earth has ever discovered solutions to, problems that nobody but other extremely advanced astrophysicists have even pondered to be problems. An individual who has applied his advanced understanding to 100,000 real universe equations that he knows the specific answers to and could spout off like an advanced AI if he so chose. Now, how would this individual go about proving his profound expertise to, firstly, a group of college students just getting into astrophysics, and beyond that, to a group of middle schoolers, and beyond that, to a group of first graders? The only way that he could prove the depth of his expertise would actually be to first make them experts in the field, which, though it might sound a little more feasible for the college students, would actually be nearly impossible without significant time investment in all three instances. The only individuals who he could make knowledgeable enough to understand his expertise without significant time investment would be individuals who already possessed a deep enough understanding of astrophysics that um, some of the additional complexity would not completely overwhelm them. So to each individual group, the savant would only be capable of teaching them in accordance with what they are capable of learning. And each individual group would only be capable of assessing him in accordance with their own knowledge base and capacity to learn, which is one of the key points that I want to keep highlighting in this essay. One of the main reasons that I'm writing this is to encourage understanding of this phenomenon from both sides of the equation, from the position of having greater knowledge than someone else about a given topic and consciously recognizing the need to teach them within their limitations, and from the position of having little knowledge about a given topic and recognizing our own limitations as we assess diverse information. So, in other words, the first graders, the middle schoolers, and the college students, which could represent our relative understanding in any given assessment of information, because they are not themselves experts, would only be able to truly assess how efficient the savant is at teaching them individually, rather than his actual expertise. Though, if they weren't careful, they might mistake their assessment of his capacity to teach them personally for an assessment of his expertise. Now, to expand upon that a little bit, the symbolic first graders obviously wouldn't really be capable of hearing anything complicated without feeling like it was an alien language, and also would barely even be equipped to tell if the savant was actually teaching them more efficiently than any other teacher, because they would barely be able to understand either the validity or the value of what they're being taught outside of how well it captures their attention, and as such have essentially served their purpose as an example of the effort to teach ignorance in the context of this phenomenon, and can be removed from further examination. Now, what the middle schoolers and college students would have that the first graders don't is a bit of a better sense of how efficiently they are being taught in terms of their own limited access to knowledge, and as such, even though they're not equipped to discern the extraordinary depth of this savant's knowledge, this theoretical teacher who could teach all other teachers on the earth if he wished, who could teach each of these classes in 100 different ways if he so chose, they would at least be better equipped to judge him as a teacher of their particular demographic, to discern how effective his teaching is for them personally, even though if he got into anything too complex, they'd also have little way to know whether or not he was correct or incorrect or simply making things up, because they would not be equipped to verify it for themselves without doing some sort of significant research and expanding their knowledge base. Now, that said, it is worth also considering the burden that is placed on the expert when the expert may be endeavoring to teach a diverse audience, as the act of focusing one's teachings in a way that effectively teaches a particular demographic is liable to naturally ostracize other demographics in certain ways. For example, if our savant were to focus his teachings in a way that was very effective for the middle schoolers to establish some building blocks for their greater understanding of astrophysics when both the first graders and college students were also present, the first graders and college students might be liable to perceive him as less of an expert since he was curating his teachings to a different demographic and they didn't learn as much from him. And to expand that point, if this savant were instead curating his teachings to explore some of his more profound knowledge with a panel of geniuses, he might be liable to ostracize all three other demographics due to none of them being able to comprehend the significance of his teachings. So the act of teaching profound and complex information in almost any regard is a fundamentally, or constitutes a fundamentally different emphasis from the act of teaching with the intention to appeal to a larger audience. And hence the concept of valuing popular opinion as an indication of expertise in many cases is a very fundamentally flawed notion and should be recognized as such by everyone who is capable of acknowledging that the capacity to appeal to others is something that is fundamentally different from access to truth. And all of this applies very poignantly to the complexities of spiritually guiding one another, particularly in the context of public presentation, where there are hundreds of diverse demographics who are more or less receptive to various methods of teaching, and there can be significant consequences to how people react positively or negatively to various methods of expression, where it's kind of like we're all in a giant zoo, and every individual's spirit animal needs a different kind of spiritual food to eat and to grow. Um, but we can only create one kind of spiritual food at a time, and if the bears and the parrots see us feeding the lions, oh, they might think that we're just a lion person, and so on and so forth. But really, we want the whole zoo to flourish. It's just fundamentally impossible to feed everyone's souls the kind of spiritual wisdom and love they need and deserve all at the same time, no matter how extraordinarily knowledgeable and wise anyone becomes. So, in conclusion, I want to once again encourage you to contemplate this phenomenon from the position of both the teacher and the student in any given theoretical situation. Though in the vastness of creation, we are far more often the seeker of knowledge than the expert. And as the seeker of knowledge, it is the act of recognizing our limitations when studying information that keeps us fully self-aware and prevents us from becoming overconfident and presumptuous about either the expertise of others or the veracity of information in various ways, which would ultimately inhibit our capacity to make adjustments in the face of new evidence. And on the other hand, when it is our position to teach others, it can hardly be emphasized enough how important it is to remain mindful of the nature of those we are teaching and able to be not just good teachers, but communicators in general, particularly when we are working with diverse audiences. Furthermore, it's worth keeping in mind that this also applies to the fundamental act of teaching others about ourselves, since we are usually more of an expert about our own nature than others are, especially the more complex we become over time, and we are frequently striving to translate and display some fraction of our wholeness within the limitations of others' understandings, even if it is understandably rare to connect with others in a way that they are both willing and able to truly dive into our depths and understand our complexities. So that said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this to a close. As always, I appreciate those of you who actually watch these videos through to the end and are willing to consider the potential value that I'm trying to offer you in regards to how to accurately understand and efficiently, positively impact the fundamental nature of reality, in spite of the fact that I'm not exceptionally entertaining in a world which is saturated with competitive entertainment, which sort of allows me to hide significant spiritual treasures in plain sight, almost too effectively, to the point where my book and music and association with Billie Eilish, all of which could have a significant impact on a lot of people if they were understood and appreciated, remain essentially completely buried due to lack of exposure, which is part of what inspired me to have this little talk about the expansion connection inversion phenomenon, since, if this notion does not come to be more commonly understood, humanity at large may continue to be overeager to assess the value of information based on popularity and groupthink without necessarily recognizing that absolute truth and meaningful complexity often inversely correlate with popularity. So I hope that it will prove valuable to you to keep some of these subtleties in mind as you navigate the highly volatile infotainment landscape of the modern world. And go ahead and feel free to let me know if you have any questions in the comment section.